Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about the difference between observational studies and experiments. Big ideas from this. Observational studies In observational studies and experiments, the one big difference is that there are treatments. So treatments are what you do in an experiment. So do you give them the new experimental drug, or do you give them the placebo? Do you have them do the exercise before measuring their heart rate, or don't you? And so for observational studies, there are no treatments imposed. You're literally just watching them. You only observe. For experiments, treatments are imposed, and it allows us to talk about causation. Does this particular treatment cause something to happen? So treatments imposed. In observational studies, sometimes there's, a temptation to see a pattern, right? So you observe that one thing happens, and then it appears that something else always happens in line with that. And so you might say, oh, well, these two things, this causes this to happen. And so really, that's just correlation. So observational studies, we observe, and we might say, oh, they're correlated, but we can never say that it causes because we don't do any treatments to test it. So what happens with this is, when we start to talk about experiments and we start to talk about what is the structure of an experiment, we need to look at it kind of from what are we trying to measure and what are we doing. So we're going to look at the concept of the explanatory variable. An explanatory variable is used to predict okay? And when we have more than one of them, they're called more than one they're called the factors. And factors have levels, and we're going to explore that a little bit more later. And the response variables are the outcomes. So explanatory variables are used to predict, so we would use those to predict a potential outcome, and those response variables then become the outcomes. Let's talk a little bit more about treatments. So treatments that's what is done to the participants. So what is done to the participants? Like I said, did they have the Coca-Cola with caffeine or the Coca-Cola without caffeine? Did they do the sit-ups or the push-ups? Did they watch the instructional video or not? So the treatments are what's done to the participants. And when we use the term experimental units, those are what or who the treatments are done to. Okay, or imposed on. And then we come to a very, very important part of consideration in experiments is the confounding variables. And the confounding variables are what we control for to try to limit things that might keep us from truly understanding what is going on. And so confounding variables are variables not controlled for that affect the results. Okay? Variables not controlled for that affect results. So, if you do a heart rate study and you gave some people Coca-Cola with caffeine and some people Coca-Cola without caffeine, but you had two different types of, two different types of people that, I don't know, react to caffeine and not, or whatever happens to be. So you have these confounding variables that if you don't control for them, then they could influence your outcomes and they could make you think something's happened that's not really actually happening. All right, so check your understanding. How does this work? Well, as a reminder, so you should read the prompt, try the problem, and then come back and watch my explanation and check your answer. You can do that in part or in whole, meaning you can do the whole, check your understanding, and go back and check, or you can do it by parts. Pause for the first one, watch the explanation, pause for the second part, then watch the explanation. All right. Does reducing screen brightness increase battery life in laptop computers? To find out, researchers obtained 30 brand new laptops of the same brand. They chose 15 of the computers at random and adjusted their screens to the brightness setting. The other 15 laptop screens were left at the default setting, moderate brightness. Researchers then measured how long each machine's battery lasted. Was this an observational study or an experiment? So the big question is, was there a treatment imposed or were we just watching? Did they do something to these laptops or were they just watching? Well, the answer is that this is an experiment because it says left at the default setting, adjusted their screen's brightness setting. So treatments were imposed. So treatments. In this case, adjusting screen or not were imposed. So did we just watch? No, we actually did something. We affected one half of the machines, and so therefore it's an experiment. Questions 2 through 4 refer to the following setting. Does eating dinner with families improve students' academic performance? According to an ABC News article, teenagers who eat with their families at least 5 times a week are more likely to get better grades in school. 24. This finding was based on a sample survey conducted by researchers at Columbia University. So was this an observational study or an experiment? So what did they do? So it was a sample survey conducted by researchers at Columbia University. So the question is, did they do something to these families? Did they have them eat dinner in a certain way? Did they have them meet together a certain number of times? The answer is no. And because this is a sample survey, this would be called an observational study. They did not assign students to eat with their families. Okay, they did not assign students to eat with their families. So because they assigned nothing, it means that they didn't have any sort of treatment or any sort of treatments imposed here. So this is not an experiment. What is the explanatory and response variables? The explanatory variable would be whether or not they ate with the family at least 5 times per week. And our response variable was their grades. Okay, so they were measuring the explanatory variable, how many did they eat with their family 5 times a week. Response variable is what they were looking at, it was their grades. Explain clearly why such a study cannot be established as cause and effect. Relationship suggests a variable that may be confounded with whether families eat dinner together. All right, so here we go. Firstly, cannot establish cause and effect. Well, we can't say cause and effect meaning we can't say because they ate dinner with their family 5 times a week, the effect was higher grades because it's not an experiment. And there are confounding variables. There are confounding factors. So what are some confounding variables? It could be what they eat. It could be like, the healthiness of their diet. Okay. Healthy diet may affect grades, right? So if they sit down to eat, they may have a healthier diet than if they're just eating out all the time. Who knows? Who knows why that is? But this is why we can't establish a cause and effect relationship, because we imposed no treatments. We didn't impose any treatments. And so we're just simply watching and seeing what happened. All right. So that's the difference between observational studies and experiments. We will